They say a mistake comes at a high price, but no one mentions when the mistake turns into the only person capable of turning your life upside down. He only wanted a perfect employee, and ended up trapped by the most irresistible disaster that ever walked into his office. If you are tired of lukewarm romance and want a story that provokes, surprises, and heals, stick around. Before we start, please leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and hype the video to help the channel grow. James Sheridan woke up every day at 5:42 a.m. Not 5:40, not 6 o'clock, 5:42. There was a logic behind it. 18 minutes of stretching, 12 minutes in the shower, 23 minutes to get dressed and have breakfast, and exactly 5 minutes of allowance for contingencies that honestly never happened. At 45, James had turned his life into an impeccable operating system. CEO of a strategic consulting firm in the heart of Chicago, he commanded million-dollar decisions with the same ease as someone choosing a milkshake flavor. His office on the 18th floor was a physical extension of his own brain. Clean, organized, devoid of any object that didn't serve a clear purpose. Even the pen holder had a specific angle relative to the mouse. He liked it that way. Controlled, predictable, safe. On that early year morning, James crossed the marble lobby of the corporate building with unsweetened black coffee in his right hand and an Italian leather brief in his left. He greeted the security guard with a dry nod, ignored the crowded elevator, and climbed the stairs. 17 floors. Exactly 13. 100 steps burning 320 calories. He knew because he counted. Upon entering his office, he found his younger brother sitting in his chair, feet propped up on the desk, and a smile that promised trouble. Kennedy Sheridan was 40, but he looked like he had stopped. Aging at 35. Entrepreneur, investor, and owner of a supernatural ability to show up uninvited, Kennedy represented everything James avoided: chaos, improvisation, easy charm, and a social calendar that probably violated the laws of physics. "Good morning, favorite robot," Kennedy said, spinning the chair like a B-movie villain. James placed the coffee on the desk, moved his brother out of the way with a gesture, and sat down in his rightful place. "You know this is called trespassing, right? Technically, this is a corporate office, and I'm a shareholder." Kennedy crossed his arms behind his head. "So, technically, half of this chair is mine. You own 2% of the company. 2.7, round up." James opened his laptop, typed in his password, and began reviewing emails as if his brother weren't there, which, from experience, he knew never worked. "You're going to die alone with a spreadsheet, you know that, right?" Kennedy leaned forward, with that look of someone about to say something profoundly annoying. "Like, literally, they'll find you hugging your laptop with an Excel file open." James didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Better than dying wrapped up with someone I met 3 hours earlier at a bar." Ouch, that hurt. "It was supposed to." Kennedy laughed, and James allowed a tiny, almost invisible smile to touch the corner of his lips. Not that he would admit it. Admitting things with Kennedy was like signing a contract without reading the fine print. "But seriously," Kennedy continued, standing up and adjusting the ridiculously expensive jacket he was wearing, "when was the last time you went out with someone? And don't give me that business dinner with the executive from Parker & Sons, because that was a meeting in disguise." James finally looked up. "You came here at 7 in the morning to question my love life? I came here because I was passing by. The questioning is a bonus." "How generous." Kennedy patted his brother's shoulder. "Look, I love you, okay? But you need someone to mess up this military routine a bit. Someone who forces you to eat cold pizza straight from the box, who laughs too loud, who makes you forget what your next appointment is." James returned his gaze to the screen, but the phrase lingered in the air, too heavy to be completely ignored. "I don't need that. You say that now." Kennedy walked toward the door, paused, and turned with a crooked smile. "But when she shows up, you'll beg her to stay." And he left, leaving James alone with his cooling coffee, his growing to-do list, and an inexplicable irritation building in his chest. He shook his head, as if he could literally shake the conversation out of his mind, and returned to work. Because that's what he did. He worked. He controlled. He organized. There was no room for improvisation, nor for chaos. And there was definitely no room for someone who would mess up his routine. Or at least that's what he believed. On the other side of Chicago, Brianna Royster woke up with a violent jolt, looked at the digital clock flashing 8:47, and let out a string of curses that would make a truck driver blush. She had overslept. Again. She jumped out of bed, tripped over the rug, stubbed her little toe on the corner of the dresser, and cursed the whole universe while hopping on one foot to the bathroom. Brianna was 34, worked as a creative lead in the campaign sector of a major company, and possessed the rare gift of turning any simple morning into an award-winning slapstick comedy. She showered in record time, brushed her teeth while blow-drying her hair, a skill she had perfected over the years, threw on the first outfit she found, and rushed to the kitchen, where her neighbor and best friend, Grace Terrell, was calmly drinking coffee sitting on the counter, as if she owned the place. "You know I live here, right?" Brianna tossed her purse onto the sofa and opened the fridge with unnecessary force. Grace raised her mug in a sarcastic toast. "You also know you gave me a key and said I could come in whenever I wanted, right?" I was being polite, not literal. Too late. I'm part of the inventory now. Grace took a long sip of coffee and looked at Brianna with that look of someone about to say something embarrassing. "So how was the blind date last week?" Brianna closed the fridge and turned around, holding a bottle of orange juice and an expression of pure regret. "He spent 40 minutes talking about cryptocurrencies. Wow. And then he sent me a link to his YouTube channel. Oh no, where he analyzes obscure coins using tarot cards." Grace choked on her coffee. "No way. Unfortunately, way." Brianna poured the juice into the glass with less coordination than she should have and managed to splash it onto her own blouse. "And now I have a giant orange stain right in the middle of my chest. Perfect. Exactly what I needed. You have other blouses, Bri." "I don't have time to change." Grace got off the counter, grabbed a dish towel, and tried to help, but it was too late. The stain was there, screaming, impossible to ignore. "You know what I think?" Grace crossed her arms and tilted her head with that cheap therapist expression. "I think you sabotage things on purpose." "I don't sabotage anything. I just happen." "You happen? Seriously?" Brianna huffed, tossed the towel back into the sink, and grabbed her purse in a hurry. "This year is going to be different, Grace, I swear. I'm going to be punctual, organized, I'm going to stop dropping things, and I'm finally going to—" The phone rang. She answered without looking. "Hello? Brianna, are you coming in or planning to work from home today?" The voice on the other end was Justin Quiles, a designer in the creative sector, a longtime friend and owner of a sarcasm that could cut steel. "I'm leaving now. You said that 20 minutes ago. This time it's true." "Of course it is." He hung up. Brianna looked at Grace, who was trying not to laugh. "See? Different. Totally different." "Uh-huh, I see that." She ran out, slammed the door, came back because she forgot her keys, grabbed the keys, slammed the door again, and finally disappeared down the hallway. Grace stood there alone in the apartment, shaking her head with a smile on her face. That girl is a walking disaster, but she was a lovable disaster. Brianna arrived at the office 20 minutes later, breathless, with her hair half down and her blouse stained with juice. She crossed the lobby with quick steps, nodded to the receptionist, and entered the elevator seconds. Before the doors closed, inside she was alone. She took a deep breath, adjusted her hair in the reflection of the metal doors, and muttered to herself, "You've got this. Just one more day, one day at a time." The elevator stopped on the 7th floor. Justin got in, took one look at her, laughed. "What happened?" "Don't ask. You have a giant stain on your chest." "I know. Like, impossible to miss." "I know." Justin laughed louder and pressed the button for the 12th floor, where the creative department was located. "You are a work of art, Bri. Like literally, a living abstract painting." "Thanks, I think." It was a compliment. It didn't sound like one. The doors opened and the two walked out together, heading down the hallway full of posters, drafts, and an organized chaos that was the creative department's trademark. Here, Brianna felt at home, less judged, more free. Justin stopped at his office door and turned with a crooked smile. "You know, sometimes I think you have too much energy for such a serious company. So what should I do? Move to a circus? It wouldn't be the worst idea." She threw a stapler at him. Justin ducked, laughing, and went into his office. Brianna sighed, sat down at her desk, and looked at the pile of papers waiting for her. Another week, another routine, another chance to prove she could be responsible, organized, professional, or at least try, because deep down, she knew the truth. Responsibility wasn't exactly her strong suit, but improvisation she mastered. And maybe that's what made her good at what she did. Or maybe it was just chaos disguised as talent. Somewhere between the 18th and 12th floors of that glass and steel corporate building, two completely opposite routines followed their parallel courses. One, governed by absolute control and meticulous planning. The other, guided by improvisation, energy, and an impressive ability to turn the ordinary into the chaotic. They didn't know each other yet. They hadn't crossed paths yet. They had no idea that in less than 48 hours, a completely absurd administrative error would change everything. And when that happened, neither spreadsheets nor improvisation would be enough to contain what was about to begin. Brianna woke up that Tuesday with a strange feeling that something important was about to happen. Not necessarily something good, just important. Like when you feel you've forgotten something, but you can't remember what. She ignored the sensation, had coffee with Grace, who insisted on commenting about strange energies in the air, and headed to work with the determination of someone trying to prove something to herself. Today would be different. Today would be organized. Today would be productive. She arrived at the office only 10 minutes late, which, by her standards, was practically Olympic. Punctuality. Justin greeted her with a lazy nod from the next desk and went back to scribbling something on a digital clipboard. The creative sector worked at its own rhythm, chaotic and vibrant, full of overlapping conversations and forgotten iced coffees on desks overflowing with drafts. Brianna loved it. It was the only place where her accelerated brain didn't seem out of place. But this morning, there was one specific task that needed to be completed: delivering documents for a finished project to the Human Resources Department. Nothing complicated, just a folder with signed contracts, filled out forms, and some spreadsheets that Justin had insisted on printing because HR is too analog to trust only digital. Simple, or so it should be. Brianna grabbed the folder, checked the contents 3 times, because even she knew checking was important, and headed toward the 10th floor where HR was located. She got into the elevator, pressed the right button, and began mentally reviewing the list of things she needed to do afterward, adjusting the layout for the new campaign, answering the emails that had been accumulating since Friday, remembering to buy milk on the way home. The doors opened. She stepped out. She walked down the hallway, turned left, passed 2 rooms, turned right, and entered the first open door she saw with a sign reading, "Interviews." Only, it wasn't the right room, but Brianna didn't realize it, because she was busy trying to balance the folder, her phone, and the purse that insisted on slipping off her shoulder. A woman in a black suit and thin-rimmed glasses looked up from a clipboard and smiled with corporate efficiency. "You must be the 9:30 candidate." Brianna blinked. "I'm the what?" "The candidate." The woman checked her watch. "You're a little early, but that's fine. I prefer it. Please have a seat." Brianna looked around, confused. The room was small, with a meeting table, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard full of schedules. It definitely didn't look like the place she was supposed to be. But the woman was already flipping through papers, taking notes, and muttering something about an accelerated selection process. "I'm sorry. No need to be nervous. It's just a formality. The position has already been practically approved internally." The woman smiled again, this time with less patience. "Did you bring the documents?" Brianna looked at the folder she was holding. "I did, but perfect. Leave it here, and I'll forward it." And before Brianna could protest, the folder was whisked out of her hands, placed on the table, and opened with frightening efficiency. "Great. Everything seems to be in order." The woman closed the folder, stood up, and gestured toward the door. "Someone will take you up to the 18th floor now. The CEO prefers to meet candidates personally before hiring. It's quick, just an informal chat." "Wait, 18th floor, elevator on the right, good luck." And just like that, without fully understanding what was happening, Brianna found herself being ushered out of the room, gently pushed down the corridor, and pointed toward the elevator, like a package being dispatched to the wrong address. She got into the elevator, still processing. She pressed the button for the 18th floor because, well, That's what she had been told. And as she ascended, she pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Justin. "I think I just got into something weird." The reply was almost instantaneous. "Good luck not being yourself." She huffed, put her phone away, and tried to organize her thoughts. Maybe it was some interdepartmental meeting. Maybe HR needed the CEO's approval for some creative project. It made sense. Sort of. The elevator doors opened. The 18th floor was completely different from the rest of the building. Silent, elegant, minimalist in a way that looked expensive. The walls were white, the floor was light wood, and there was a receptionist sitting behind a glass desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated unnecessary objects. "Can I help you?" The receptionist smiled with professional courtesy. "I think I have a meeting." Brianna tried to sound confident, but the sentence came out as a question. "Name?" "Brianna Royster." The receptionist checked her computer screen, clicked a few times, and nodded. "Oh yes, the interview. You can go right in. Last door down the corridor to the left." Interview. Brianna walked down the corridor, each step echoing softly on the wooden floor. She passed a few closed doors, abstract, paintings hanging on the walls, and a growing feeling that she had walked into the wrong episode of her own life. She reached the last door, took a deep breath, knocked twice. "Come in." The voice on the other side was deep, controlled, and carried the kind of authority that made you want to apologize for things you hadn't even done. Brianna turned the doorknob and entered. The office was exactly what she would imagine for a CEO. Clean, organized, with a huge dark wood desk, 2 leather armchairs, a bookshelf filled with books arranged by size and color, and a panoramic view of Chicago that probably cost more than her entire apartment. And behind the desk, there he was, James Sheridan. Brianna knew who he was, of course. Everyone in the company did. CEO, founder, strategic genius, the man who turned crises into profits and never, ever smiled in corporate. Photos. She had seen his face in presentations, institutional emails, and that business magazine someone left in the dentist's waiting room once. But seeing him in person was different. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with slightly wavy dark hair that looked like it had been styled by hand, or perhaps it just fell that way because the universe was unfair. His beard was precisely trimmed, and his light eyes possessed the intensity of someone who was constantly analyzing everything around him. He was wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and Brianna caught herself thinking that this should be illegal. No one should look so functional and attractive at the same time. James looked up from his laptop and studied her for a moment that seemed to last too long. "You must be the candidate." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Brianna opened her mouth to correct him, but something in his tone, firm, decisive, as if the answer was already established, caused the words to stick in her throat. Yes?" Again, it came out as a question. James gestured toward the chair in front of the desk. "Sit down." She obeyed, because she couldn't think of anything else to do. She put her purse on her lap, crossed her legs, uncrossed them, and crossed them again. James went back to typing something on his laptop, as if finishing a thought, and then closed the screen and directed his full attention to her. And what attention it was! It was like being observed by an airport scanner, complete, detailed, slightly invasive. "Your resume is interesting." He flipped through some printed pages on the desk, pages that, Brianna realized with growing horror, were not hers. 3 years in, project management, experience with multiple simultaneous clients, proficiency with corporate software. Brianna opened her mouth, ready to interrupt, but he continued. "What interests me is knowing how you handle pressure, because here, pressure is the default setting." She blinked. "I didn't handle it well." "Are you asking or stating?" "Stating, definitely stating." James leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes still fixed on her. "Give me an example." Brianna felt her brain go into panic mode. An example of handling pressure while being interviewed for a job she hadn't applied for by a man who seemed capable of reading minds. "Well, one time I had to deliver 3 different campaigns on the same day because the client changed their mind at the last minute and..." "Campaigns?" James frowned, confused. "You work in marketing?" "I work in creation, in the creative department, here, At this company, there was a pause. A long, strange pause, fraught with mutual confusion. James looked at the papers on the desk, then at her, then back at the papers. You already work here? Yes, for 4 years. In creative? Yes. And you are being interviewed for the temporary assistant position. Brianna finally understood, and the penny dropped with the force of a piano plummeting from the 20th floor. I'm not being interviewed. I came to drop off documents in HR, and someone thought I was someone else and sent me here, and I didn't quite understand, and she spoke fast, the words tumbling over each other, her hands gesturing in the air, as if they could physically push the explanation out faster. And then, because the universe had a cruel sense of humor, she knocked over the pen that was on the edge of the desk. The pen rolled. James reached out, caught it mid-air with reflexes that seemed like a professional baseball player's, and put it back in place. Brianna stared at him, slack-jawed. That was unnecessarily impressive. His lips curved. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was close. Thank you. It wasn't a compliment. It sounded like one. It wasn't. James watched her for another second, as if trying to decide if this was real or if he had woken up in an alternate dimension. And then, slowly, he stood up, walked to the window, and stood there with his back to her, looking out at the city below. So you're not the temporary assistant? No. And you're here by mistake? Apparently. And you've been working in creative for 4 years? Yes. He turned, crossed his arms, and studied her with an expression Brianna couldn't decipher. And no one recognized you on the way? I usually stay on the 12th floor, and I'm forgettable. I doubt that. The word came out quickly, almost automatically, and James seemed as surprised as she was. Brianna felt her face heat up. It wasn't a usual blush. It was the kind of heat that started at the neck and rose to her ears, impossible to hide. Well, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and tried to recover any semblance of dignity. I'm going to leave and let you do what CEOs do. Wait. She stopped, her hand already on the doorknob. James walked back to the desk, picked up a different folder, one that Brianna recognized as the one she had brought, and held it out toward her. I think this is yours. Brianna took the folder, her fingers briefly brushing against his, and it was quick, less than a second, but it was enough to make her stomach do a strange, unexpected flip. Thank you. You're welcome. She left, closed the door, and stood there in the corridor, breathing as if she had just run a marathon. What the heck had just happened? Meanwhile, inside the office, James remained standing next to his desk, looking at the closed door with an expression that fluctuated between confusion and genuine annoyance. He had just interviewed the wrong person for a position he wasn't even filling himself, and instead of immediately fixing the problem, as he would with any other administrative error, he had let her leave without even calling HR, which was objectively strange. James was methodical, efficient. When something was out of place, he corrected it right away. But this time, he had just let it go. Why? He had no answer. The door opened without warning. Kennedy walked in with the confidence of someone who never asked for permission, holding a large envelope. Brought the documents you asked for, Kennedy said, tossing the envelope onto the desk. Acquisition contracts signed, stamped, ready for the archives. James took the envelope, checked it briefly, and nodded. Thank you. You're welcome. Kennedy threw himself into the leather armchair as if he owned it. You have a strange look on your face. I do not. You do, like, confused, which is rare. You're never confused. James went back behind his desk and opened his laptop forcefully. It's just been a long morning. It's 10:30. A long and annoying morning. Kennedy raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that something was up, but not knowing exactly what. What happened? Did someone spill coffee on the sacred keyboard? Did the internet crash? Did someone breathe near? You? Nothing happened? Lie, you're typing angrily. I am not. You are. You always type angrily when something throws you off balance. James stopped typing and looked directly at his brother. Don't you have anything else to do? I do, but this is more interesting. Kennedy leaned forward, smiling. Come on, what was it? Bad meeting, annoying client, Excel froze? It was just an administrative misunderstanding, nothing important. Ah, so it was something important. Kennedy, look, I know you. When you say it's nothing, it's always something. Kennedy stood, adjusted his jacket. But it's fine. I won't pressure you. I just came to drop off the papers anyway. He walked to the door, paused, and turned with that annoying smile. But you know what I think? I think you need more misunderstandings in your life. Everything too perfect gets boring. And he left, leaving James alone with his own thoughts and an inconvenient truth. Perhaps his brother was right. James looked at the laptop screen but couldn't focus, because the morning had been different, unexpected, and he didn't quite know how to process that. It wasn't attraction. That would be ridiculous. He barely knew the woman. It was just strangeness, the feeling that something had gone off script, and he hadn't completely hated it. And that, in itself, was unsettling enough. The mistake should have been corrected immediately. The next day, Brianna should have been back on the 12th floor, working on creative campaigns, far from the 18th floor, and definitely far from James Sheridan. She should have, but the universe had other plans. The morning after the accidental encounter, Brianna received an automatic email from the HR system confirming her temporary transfer to the executive department, serving as the CEO's assistant. The email included a schedule, a list of responsibilities, and an access code for the 18th floor. She read it 3 times, hoping the words would magically change. They did not. Grace was sitting on the sofa in her apartment, eating cereal straight from the box and watching the whole thing with the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered a new reality show. "You got promoted by accident," Grace said, chewing loudly. "That's like winning the lottery without buying a ticket. This isn't a promotion, it's a catastrophic administrative error. Or," Grace pointed her spoon at her, "it's the universe shoving you toward a ridiculously handsome man who is clearly intrigued by you." Brianna threw a pillow at her. "He's not intrigued. He's confused. Confusion is the first stage of attraction. You just made that up." "I did not. I read it in an article." "What article?" "An article I found on the internet." Brianna sighed, picked up her phone, and typed a quick message to Justin. "HR transferred me by mistake. Officially, I'm stuck on the 18th floor." The answer came in seconds. Justin replied, laughing, "Good luck, soldier. It was nice knowing you." "You're not going to help me?" "Absolutely not. This is pure entertainment. I'm making popcorn." Brianna dropped the phone on the coffee table and buried her face in her hands. "I'm going to get fired, or worse. I'm going to be permanently promoted to something I don't know how to do." Grace leaned forward, put the cereal box aside, and held her friend's shoulders with theatrical seriousness. "Listen, you are smart, creative, and you have an inexplicable ability to solve problems that you yourself create. It will work out." That wasn't comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be true. And so, against all logic and common sense, Brianna found herself in the elevator the next morning, heading up to the 18th floor with a coffee in hand and a growing feeling that she was about to star in a real-time disaster. The doors opened. The receptionist smiled. "Good morning, Brianna. The CEO is waiting for you." Of course he was. Brianna walked down the corridor, knocked on the door, and entered without waiting for an answer, because waiting would only increase the panic. James was sitting behind his desk, typing something on his laptop with the speed of someone who thought faster than most people breathed. He looked up, and for a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Surprise, perhaps, or resignation. "You actually came. HR said I should. HR made a mistake. I know that. You know that. Apparently the system doesn't know that." James closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest in a way that made his forearm muscles absurdly visible. Brianna immediately looked away, because looking was dangerous. "I'm going to call HR now and sort this out," he said, already picking up the phone. "Great. Perfect. Wonderful." But James didn't dial. He sat there, looking at the phone, his hand suspended, in the air as if waiting for his own brain to decide what to do. And then, inexplicably, he placed the phone back on the desk. "You know what? Forget it. You're staying." Brianna blinked. "I'm what?" "Staying. Temporarily. Until HR finds someone suitable. But I don't know how to do this." "Can you read emails?" "Yes." "Can you answer the phone?" "Technically." "Can you organize files?" "Depends on your definition of organize." James studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. It will work. And just like that, without ceremony, without logic, Brianna became the accidental temporary assistant to the CEO of the company where she already worked. The first disaster happened 20 minutes later. James was in a virtual meeting with an international client when the office phone rang. Brianna, sitting at the desk they had placed for her, outside his office, looked at the device as if it were a bomb about to explode. To answer or not to answer? The phone rang again and again. She picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hoarse, rushed, speaking with a heavy, unidentified accent. "I need to speak with Mr. Sheridan. Now, it's urgent." Brianna frowned. Urgent. That sounded important, but it also sounded exactly like the kind of thing scammers said. "Who is this?" "This is about the Frankfurt deal. Put him on the phone." Frankfurt. That sounded German, corporate, or completely made up. Brianna made an executive decision. "I'm sorry, but this sounds like spam. Have a good day." And she hung up. 30 seconds later, James emerged from the office with an expression that would make any sensible person consider moving countries. "You just hung up on our biggest European investor." Brianna froze. What? Frankfurt. The deal we've been closing for 3 months. He called. You hung up. He sounded like spam. He was calling from Germany. I don't know what German spam sounds like." James ran a hand over his face, took a deep breath, and counted to 10. Brianna could see the numbers forming in his mind, an exercise in self-control that was clearly failing. Do not hang up on anyone, ever. Not even if it sounds like spam. Not even if it is spam. You transfer the call to me. Understood? Even if the person is selling something. Understood? Even if it's a robot. I get it. James went back into the office and closed the door with controlled force. The kind of force that said, "I want to slam this door, but I'm too professional for that." Brianna slumped in her chair and sent a message to Justin. "I just hung up on a German investor thinking he was spam. Ha 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 ha. You are a legend." "I'm not kidding. Me neither. This is gold." The second disaster happened a little later. James asked her to bring him coffee. Black coffee, no sugar. Simple. Brianna went down to the building's cafeteria, ordered the coffee, returned to the elevator, and managed, in a way that defied the laws of physics, to trip over her own feet while stepping out on the 18th floor. The coffee flew in slow motion, like in action movies, the cup describing a perfect arc in the air and dumping all the hot, dark contents directly onto James's gray blazer, who had stepped out of the office at exactly the wrong time, or the right one, depending on the perspective. "Oh my God." Brianna dropped the empty cup and tried to wipe the blazer with her hands, which only made everything worse. I'm so sorry, so sorry. That was coffee," James said, his voice frighteningly calm. "On my blazer. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, or buy a new one, or sell a kidney. Whatever is necessary." He took off the blazer, held it in the air for a second as if assessing the damage, and then threw it over her chair. "Forget it. No, seriously, Brianna." He said her name for the first time, and the sound echoed in a strange, warm way that made her stomach flip. "Forget it. I have others." And he returned to his office, leaving behind a coffee-soaked blazer and a completely disconcerted Brianna. Because he didn't yell. He didn't complain. He did nothing but accept the chaos with a resignation that bordered on the supernatural, and that was more unsettling than any scolding. In the afternoon, the third disaster was just waiting to happen. James had an important meeting in the conference room on the 17th floor. He asked Brianna to book the main room, the largest one, with a view of the lake. She booked it, or at least, she thought she had booked it. But when James went down with 3 impeccably dressed executives, they found the room occupied by a group of interns giving a presentation on corporate sustainability. James stood at the doorway, looking into the room, then at Brianna, then back into the room, as if trying to process the existence of a parallel universe where this made sense. "Wrong room," Brianna said quietly. "You booked the wrong room." "Technically, I booked a room, it just wasn't this one." One of the executives cleared his throat. James turned around, smiled with a courtesy so sharp it could cut glass, and said, "Give me a minute." He pulled Brianna into the hallway, away from corporate ears. "How do you book the wrong room?" They have similar names, Michigan and Superior. They're both lakes. One is the 17th floor. The other is the 14th. Details. Important details. Brianna crossed her arms, defensiveness rising like the tide. Look, I know I'm messing everything up. I know you don't want me here. But I am trying, okay? I'm really trying. And there was something in her voice, a raw, unfiltered sincerity that made James pause. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and shook his head. I know you're trying. It doesn't sound like it. Because I'm terrible at saying things that don't involve spreadsheets. Brianna blinked, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed. A short, surprised laugh that escaped before she could stop it. And James, serious, controlled, methodical James, smiled back. It wasn't much, just a pull at the corner of his lips, but it was enough. Let's fix this, he said, his voice softer. Together. And they fixed it. They found another room, improvised, and made the meeting work. And when it was all over, when the executives left satisfied and Brianna returned to her desk, James stood at the office door, watching. Why does she talk so much? The question came out of nowhere, floating in his mind like a leaf carried by the wind. She talked. A lot. She jumped from subject to subject with the agility of someone thinking in 3 dimensions simultaneously. It was exhausting, chaotic, and inexplicably fascinating. James shook his head, tried to push the thought away, but it stuck like gum. Why do I find this intriguing? He didn't find chaos intriguing. Never had. Chaos was the enemy, the opposite of control, the antithesis of everything he had built. So why the hell was he smiling? On the other side of the door, Brianna buried her face in her hands and let out a long sigh. What a day. An entire day trying to do a job she didn't know how to do, for a man who was clearly regretting every decision that had led him to this moment. Why hasn't he called HR yet? This was the question that bothered her the most. James had had all day to correct the mistake. He could have made a quick call, sorted everything out in 5 minutes, and she would have been back in creative before lunch. But he didn't. And Brianna didn't know if that was good or extremely worrying. That night she returned home and found Grace already settled on the sofa, watching something on TV with a glass of wine in her hand. So, how was the first official day as the accidental assistant? Brianna flopped down next to her and stole the glass of wine. I hung up on a German investor, spilled coffee on his blazer, and booked the wrong room for an important meeting. Grace looked at her with a mix of horror and admiration. And you're still employed? Apparently. How? I have no idea. I think he's in denial. Or he's gone into survival mode and decided it's easier to keep me than to explain the size of the mess to HR. Or, Grace leaned in, stole the wine back, he realized you're good at what you do. In your chaotic, questionable way, but good. I'm not good. I'm a walking disaster. You're a functional disaster. There's a difference. Brianna grabbed a pillow and hugged it, staring at the ceiling. I don't know how I'm going to survive this. He's intense. Like, really intense. He looks at me like he's performing a mental audit of my flaws. He's the CEO. He probably is. That doesn't help. It wasn't supposed to help. It was supposed to be realistic. Grace took a sip of wine and smiled. But look on the bright side. You haven't been fired. Yet. Yet being the key word. Exactly. So enjoy it while it lasts. And try not to spill anything else on him. Brianna rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress the tired smile that escaped. Because deep down, despite the chaos, despite the mistakes, despite everything, it had been an interesting day. Different. And maybe she could survive a few more. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Kennedy invaded his brother's apartment without warning, because invading without warning was practically his love language. James was in the kitchen, preparing something that likely involved proteins and vegetables measured with scientific precision. I heard you didn't call HR? Today, Kennedy said, grabbing a beer from the fridge as if he lived there. James didn't even look up from the cutting board. How do you know that? I know everything. It's a gift. It's an invasion of privacy. It's the same thing. Kennedy opened the beer, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter. So, why didn't you call? I was busy. You're never too busy to correct administrative errors. It's like your favorite thing. James finally stopped cutting vegetables and looked at his brother. It was a long day. I'll call tomorrow. Sure you will. Kennedy smiled. That annoying smile of someone who knew something the other wasn't admitting. But just out of curiosity, is the accidental assistant competent? No. Then why is she still there? James went back to cutting the vegetables. Because bureaucracy takes time, and I had more important things to deal with. Right. Get out of my kitchen. Kennedy laughed, finished his beer, and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he turned with that infuriating brotherly expression. You know what your problem is? No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me. You're afraid of unpredictability, so when something goes off script, you freeze. Instead of fixing it, you procrastinate. The door closed, and James was left alone in the kitchen, knife in hand, with an inconvenient truth echoing in the silence. He had procrastinated. Objectively, irrationally, he had let the mistake continue when he could have solved it in minutes. Why? It wasn't attraction. It wasn't interest. It was just curiosity about how someone could be so functionally dysfunctional. At least, that's what he told himself. Brianna's first full week as the accidental assistant was, to use a generous word, chaotic. On Monday, she managed to lock James out of his own office. Not intentionally, of course. She had gone to retrieve documents, closed the door without realizing the automatic lock was activated, and returned to find the company CEO standing in the hallway with an expression that alternated between disbelief and resignation. You locked the door, leaving me out of my office, he said, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. Technically, the door locked itself and left you out. I just closed it. The distinction does not help me. There's a master key, right? With security on the ground floor. Brianna bit her lip, trying not to laugh at the absurd situation. So, you want me to go down and get it? That would be useful. She ran downstairs, explained the situation to the security guard, who clearly found it hilarious, returned with the key, and unlocked the door while James waited with his arms crossed and visibly dwindling patience. Sorry, she said when he finally stepped inside. You apologize a lot. It's because I cause a lot of problems. That is true, but there was something in his tone, something almost amused, that made Brianna realize he wasn't genuinely angry. On Tuesday, she discovered that James had back-to-back meetings and no time for lunch, so she decided, on her own initiative, to order food for him. The problem was, she didn't know what he liked, so she ordered a little bit of everything. Salad, a sandwich, soup, a vegetarian wrap, and for some reason she couldn't explain, French fries. When the food arrived, she arranged everything on his desk as if setting up a buffet. James looked at the absurd variety of options. What is this? Lunch? You hadn't eaten anything. I was going to eat later. You always say that, and you never do. How do you know? Because I pay attention. She pointed to each item. Salad if you want to eat healthy. Sandwich if you want something quick. Soup if you're too lazy to chew. Wrap if you want protein. French fries if you're stressed. James looked at her for a long moment. You've mapped my dietary needs based on emotional states? Yes, that is odd, but functional. He picked up the sandwich, took a bite, and then, surprisingly, took some French fries. Thank you. You're welcome. Consider it part of my poorly defined job. Feeding the boss is not in the job description. Neither is being here, yet here we are. James almost smiled. Almost. On Wednesday, Brianna made the mistake of trying to use the company's digital archiving system. She had watched the 3-minute tutorial HR sent, thought she understood, and started cataloging documents with the confidence of someone who clearly did not know what they were doing. 20 minutes later, James called her into the office with an urgency that made her heart pound. What did you do? I filed the contracts like you asked. You filed everything in the same folder. Yes, folder contracts. Brianna. He turned the laptop toward her, showing a folder with literally 100 files without any subfolders or organization. You just created the digital equivalent of throwing papers into a box and hoping they sort themselves out. Oh, is correct. I can fix it. Please do, before I have a nervous breakdown. She spent the next hour reorganizing everything while James worked in silence, occasionally letting out long sighs that sounded like someone questioning their life choices. When she finished, she showed him the result. Done. Organized by client, by date, and by status. James looked, checked each folder, and then did something unexpected. He nodded in approval. Better. Seriously? Yes, you learn quickly. You mess up first, but you learn. That was almost a compliment. It was a compliment. Wow, I'm going to mark this date on the calendar. He rolled his eyes, but Brianna could see the corner of his lips twitching. On Thursday, the printer incident happened. The printer on the 18th floor was, by all accounts, temperamental. It worked perfectly for some people and refused to cooperate with others. Brianna apparently was in the latter category. She tried to print a document. The printer choked, made an alarming noise, and spat out 3 blank pages before completely jamming. "This is personal," she muttered, trying to open the cover to see what had happened. James appeared behind her. "Problems. The printer hates me. Printers do not hate people. This one does. Look," she pointed to the display flashing paper jam in aggressive red letters. James sighed, approached, and began dismantling the printer with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times before. He removed the stuck paper, closed the covers, and restarted the system. "Try now." Brianna pressed the button. The printer purred softly and spat out the document perfectly printed. "How did you do that?" "Practice and patience. You have a strangely intimate relationship with this printer. I have a functional relationship. Important difference. Still strange." He almost smiled. Again, and Brianna realized she was starting to enjoy these almost smiles. They were rare enough to be valuable. On Friday afternoon, James was working on a complex spreadsheet when Brianna knocked on the door. "Can I interrupt?" "You already have." "Right." She entered, closed the door, and stood in front of his desk. "I need to ask you something." "About work?" "No, about you." James stopped typing. "About me?" "Yes, like personal." "Brianna, do you have friends?" The question came out so direct, so unexpected that James was genuinely speechless for 3 full seconds. "What?" "Friends, people you talk to about things that aren't work. People you see outside of here, normal people." "I have acquaintances." "Acquaintances don't count." "Why are you asking this?" Brianna sat down in the chair in front of him, crossed her legs, and tilted her head with that annoying curiosity she always had. "Because I work here now, and you're my boss, and I'd like to know that you're not going to have a nervous breakdown from overwork and loneliness." "I am not going to have a breakdown." Everyone says that before they have a breakdown. "You are irritating." "I know, it's part of my charm." She smiled, that disarming way that made it hard to stay annoyed. "But seriously, when was the last time you did something just for fun?" James thought. He really thought. And he realized, with growing discomfort, that he couldn't remember. "I don't know." "That's sad." Brianna stood up, walked to the door, and paused. "You know what you should do?" "I'm sure you're going to tell me." "You should leave here before 8 today. Go home, watch something stupid on TV, eat cold pizza, do something that doesn't involve work." "That sounds unproductive." "Exactly." And she left, leaving James alone with the ridiculous suggestion echoing in his mind. But that night, for the first time in months, he left the office at 7:40. He didn't watch anything stupid on TV. He didn't eat cold pizza, but he sat on the couch without his laptop, and he stayed there, just existing, and he realized that maybe Brianna was right. Maybe he needed that. At the beginning of the second week, something began to change. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be specifically pointed to, just a subtle shift in the way they interacted. James started asking questions, not just about work, but about her. "Have you always worked in creative? Since college? Why?" Curiosity. "You? Curious? About something not business-related?" "It happens. Occasionally." Brianna smiled. "Yes, I've always worked creative. It's the only thing that makes my chaotic brain function properly." "Your brain isn't chaotic. You haven't seen inside my head." "I don't need to. I see the results, and they work." It was the most sincere compliment he had ever given, and Brianna felt something strange happen, something warm, something she couldn't yet name. On Wednesday of the second week, James was particularly stressed. An important project was delayed, a client was dissatisfied, and there was a chain of problems that needed to be resolved simultaneously. Brianna saw him leave his office walked to the window and stand there with a tension that practically radiated from him. She hesitated, and then she did what she always did when she didn't know what to do. She improvised. She got up, walked over to him and said, "Do you want to hear another bad joke?" James turned his head. "Brianna, what did the 0 say to the 8? He sighed. "What? Nice belt." There was a pause, and then James laughed. "Not much, but enough. That was terrible. I warned you it was bad. It was beyond bad. It was offensive to the concept of humor. And yet you laughed." "I did not." "You did. I saw the smile." James shook his head, but he couldn't hide the lighter expression on his face. "You definitely have a style all your own. I prefer persistently optimistic. I'm not surprised." And there, standing side by side looking out at the city, through the glass something shifted again. Something small, imperceptible to anyone else. But for them, it was immense. 3 weeks. 3 weeks had passed since Brianna had become James Sheridan's accidental assistant, and the corporate world still hadn't imploded, which, considering, her track record was practically a miracle. She had learned things, small things, like how to differentiate important calls from actual spam, how not to spill coffee on people wearing expensive suits, how to book meeting rooms on the correct floor. But there were other things she hadn't learned, like, for instance, how to stop observing the way James frowned when he was concentrating, or how to ignore the way he said her name, Brianna, with that deep tone that made her stomach do involuntary somersaults. That Wednesday morning, she arrived at the office carrying a box of donuts that Grace had insisted she bring. "Corporate peace gestures," Grace had said, pushing the box into her hands. "Show them you're human. And delicious. I mean that you bring delicious things, you know." Brianna hadn't completely understood, but she brought the donuts anyway. She placed the box on her desk, organized the papers James had left the night before. She had noticed he worked absurdly late, and was about to turn on her computer when she heard his voice coming from inside the office. He was on the phone, and he was angry. It wasn't common. James rarely lost his composure, but his voice was harsher, the words more clipped, and Brianna could feel the tension radiating through the closed door. She hesitated. Should she go in or not? Wait, or pretend she hadn't heard anything? The call ended with a, "We will solve this today," that sounded more like a threat than a promise. Brianna knocked on the door twice, softly. "Come in." She opened it slowly, peeked inside, and found James standing by the window, hands braced on the glass, shoulders tense in a way that made it seem like he was physically holding back his self-control. "Are you okay?" He didn't turn around. "I am. You don't look it. I always look fine." "That's a lie. You look irritated," which is different from fine. James finally turned, and the expression on his face was a strange mix of weariness and something Brianna couldn't name. Frustration, perhaps, or emotional exhaustion disguised as professionalism. "One of our biggest clients is threatening to breach the contract because someone internally leaked confidential information to a competitor." Brianna's eyes widened. "Seriously? Seriously? And you know who it was?" "I have 3 suspects, no proof, and a meeting in 2 hours to try to save an $8 million contract." She whistled softly. "That's a lot of money. It's enough to keep half this company running for the next year." Brianna bit her lip, thinking, and then, without fully considering the consequences, she said, "Do you want me to do something? Like, I don't know, organize documents, make coffee, distract you with bad jokes?" James looked at her, and for the first time that morning, something in his face softened. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Bad jokes? I have an impressive repertoire. I'm sure you do. Want to hear one?" "No." "Why did the math book go to the psychologist?" James sighed, but she could see the corner of his lips twitching. "Why?" "Because it had too many problems." There was a pause, and then James laughed. It wasn't a roar. It was just a low, almost reluctant sound, but it was genuine, and Brianna felt something strange happen in her chest. Something warm, dangerous, that shouldn't have been there. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer. "I needed that." Bad jokes? Normalcy. They stood there side by side, with the morning light streaming through the window and illuminating the space between them. in a way that felt too cinematic to be real. And then Brianna did something completely impulsive. She left the office, came back with the box of donuts, and placed it on his desk. "Corporate peace gestures," she said, repeating Grace's words. "Or, I don't know, donuts for existential crises. They work for both." James looked at the box, then at her, and for the first time since Brianna had met him, he seemed genuinely touched. "You brought donuts," my friend Grace insisted. But I agreed, so it counts as a collaborative effort. He picked up a donut, chocolate with sprinkles, and took a bite. And then, inexplicably, he smiled. A real smile. Complete. Devastating. And Brianna needed to get out of the office before she did something stupid, like standing there staring at that smile as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever seen, which would be ridiculous, because James Sheridan was just her temporary boss, a man she barely knew, someone who 3 weeks ago didn't even know she existed. But there was something about him, something that was starting to intrigue her in a way she couldn't completely ignore. The way he became completely absorbed when he was focused, how he let out sarcastic comments that made her laugh unintentionally, how he had that absurd control over everything. But every now and then, just every now and then, he let something slip, a smile, a joke, a moment of humanity that showed there was much more beneath that corporate facade. And that was interesting, dangerously interesting, but it wasn't liking. Not yet. It was just curiosity. The kind of curiosity that made you pay more attention than you should. The kind that made you catch yourself thinking about someone when you should be thinking about anything else. And Brianna knew she needed to be careful, because men like James Sheridan didn't look at women like her. He probably dated elegant executives, women who wore high heels without tripping, and knew exactly which wine to order without consulting the menu. Brianna was the opposite of that, and she needed to remember. Before curiosity turned into something more complicated. In the afternoon, the meeting with the client happened. James left the office with an expression that wavered between confidence and controlled tension. Brianna stayed at her desk, pretending to work, but actually just counting the minutes. 2 hours later, James returned, alone, and the expression on his face said, everything. "It didn't work out?" she asked, her voice low. He stopped in front of her desk, loosened his tie, and ran a hand through his hair. "It did. They renewed the contract." Brianna blinked. "Then why do you look like you just lost a battle?" "I don't know. That's sad." Brianna stood up, walked to the door, and paused. "You know what you should do? I'm sure you're going to tell me. You should leave here before 8 today. Go home. Watch something silly on TV. Eat cold pizza. Do something that doesn't involve work." "That sounds unproductive." "Exactly." And she left, leaving James alone with the ridiculous suggestion echoing in his mind. But that night, for the first time in months, he left the office at 7:40. He didn't watch anything silly on TV. He didn't eat cold pizza, but he sat on the couch without his laptop, and he stayed there, just existing. And he realized that maybe Brianna was right. Perhaps he needed it. At the beginning of the second week, something began to change. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be specifically pointed to. Just a subtle shift in the way they interacted. James started asking questions. Not just about work, but about her. "Have you always worked in creative?" "Since college, why?" "Curiosity." "You? Curious? About something not business-related?" "It happens. Occasionally." Brianna smiled. "Yes, I've always worked in creative. It's the only thing that makes my chaotic brain function properly." "Your brain isn't chaotic. You haven't seen inside my head." "I don't need to. I see the results, and they work." It was the most sincere compliment he had ever given, and Brianna felt something strange happen. Something warm. Something she couldn't yet name. On Wednesday of the second week, James was particularly stressed. An important project was delayed. A client was dissatisfied, and there was a chain of problems that needed to be resolved simultaneously. Brianna saw him leave his office, walk to the window, and stand there with a tension that practically radiated from him. She hesitated, and then she did what she always did when she didn't know what to do. She improvised. She got up, walked over to him, and said, "Do you want to hear another bad joke?" James turned his head. "Brianna, What did the 0 say to the 8? He sighed. What? Nice belt. There was a pause, and then James laughed. Not much, but enough. That was terrible. I warned you it was bad. It was beyond bad. It was offensive to the concept of humor. And yet you laughed. I did not. You did. I saw the smile. James shook his head, but he couldn't hide the lighter expression on his face. You definitely have a style all your own. I prefer persistently optimistic. I'm not surprised. And there, standing side by side, looking out at the city through the glass, something shifted again. Something small, imperceptible to anyone else. But for them, it was immense. 3 weeks. 3 weeks had passed since Brianna had become James Sheridan's accidental assistant, and the corporate world still hadn't imploded, which, considering her track record, was practically a miracle. She had learned things. Small things. Like how to differentiate important calls from actual spam, how not to spill coffee on people wearing expensive suits, how to book meeting rooms on the correct floor. But there were other things she hadn't learned, like, for example, how to stop observing the way James frowned when he was concentrating, or how to ignore the way he said her name, Brianna, with that deep tone that made her stomach do involuntary somersaults. That Wednesday morning, she arrived at the office carrying a box of donuts that Grace had insisted she bring. Corporate peace gestures, Grace had said, pushing the box into her hands. Show them you're human and delicious. I mean, that you bring delicious things, you know. Brianna hadn't completely understood, but she brought the donuts anyway. She placed the box on her desk, organized the papers James had left the night before. She had noticed he worked absurdly late, and was about to turn on her computer when she heard his voice coming from inside the office. He was on the phone, and he was angry. It wasn't common. James rarely lost his composure, but his voice was harsher, the words more clipped, and Brianna could feel the tension radiating through the closed door. She hesitated. Should she go in or not? Wait or pretend she hadn't heard anything? The call ended with a, "We will solve this today," that sounded more like a threat than a promise. Brianna knocked on the door twice, softly. "Come in." She opened it slowly, peeked inside, and found James standing by the window, hands braced on the glass, shoulders tense in a way that made it seem like he was physically holding back his self-control. "Are you okay?" He didn't turn around. "I am." "You don't look it." "I always look fine." "That's a lie. You look irritated, which is different from fine." James finally turned, and the expression on his face was a strange mix of weariness and something Brianna couldn't name. Frustration, perhaps, or emotional exhaustion disguised as professionalism. "One of our biggest clients is threatening to break the contract because someone internally leaked confidential information to a competitor." Brianna's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Seriously. And you know who it was?" "I have 3 suspects, no proof, and a meeting in 2 hours to try to save an $8 million contract." She whistled softly. "That's a lot of money. It's enough to keep half this company running for the next year." Brianna bit her lip, thinking. And then, without fully considering the consequences, she said, "Do you want me to do something? Like, I don't know, organize documents, make coffee, distract you with bad jokes?" James looked at her, and for the first time that morning, something in his face softened. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Bad jokes? I have an impressive repertoire. I'm sure. You do. Want to hear one?" "No." "Why did the math book go to the psychologist?" James sighed, but she could see the corner of his lips twitching. "Why?" "Because it had too many problems." There was a pause, and then James laughed. It wasn't a roar. It was just a low, almost reluctant sound, but it was genuine, and Brianna felt something strange happen in her chest. Something warm, dangerous, that shouldn't have been there. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer. "I needed that." "Bad jokes?" "Normalcy." They stood there side by side, with the morning light streaming through the window and illuminating the space between them in a way that felt too cinematic to be real. And then Brianna did something completely impulsive. She left the office, came back with the box of donuts, and placed it on his desk. "Corporate peace gestures," she said, repeating Grace's words. Or, I don't know, donuts for existential crises. They work for both. James looked at the box, then at her, and for the first time since Brianna had met him, He seemed genuinely touched. "You brought donuts," my friend Grace insisted, but I agreed. "So it counts as a collaborative effort." He picked up a donut, chocolate with sprinkles, and took a bite. And then, inexplicably, he smiled. A real smile. Complete. Devastating. And Brianna needed to get out of the office before she did something stupid, like standing there, staring at that smile as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever seen, which would be ridiculous, because James Sheridan was just her temporary boss, a man she barely knew, someone who, 3 weeks ago, didn't even know she existed, but there was something about him, something that was starting to intrigue her in a way she couldn't completely ignore. The way he became completely absorbed when he was focused. How he let out sarcastic comments that made her laugh unintentionally. How he had that absurd control over everything, but every now and then, just every now and then, he let something slip. A smile, a joke, a moment of humanity that showed there was much more beneath that corporate facade. And that was interesting. Dangerously interesting. But it wasn't liking. Not yet. It was just curiosity. The kind of curiosity that made you pay more attention than you should. The kind that made you catch yourself thinking about someone when you should be thinking about anything else. And Brianna knew she needed to be careful, because men like James Sheridan didn't look at women like her. He probably dated elegant executives, women who wore high heels without tripping and knew exactly which wine to order without consulting the menu. Brianna was the opposite of that, and she needed to remember, before curiosity turned into something more complicated. In the afternoon, the meeting with the client happened. James left the office with an expression that wavered between confidence and controlled tension. Brianna stayed at her desk, pretending to work, but actually just counting the minutes. 2 hours later, James returned, alone, and the expression on his face said everything. "It didn't work out?" she asked, her voice low. He stopped in front of her desk, loosened his tie, and ran a hand through his hair. "It did. They renewed the contract." Brianna blinked. "Then why do you look like you just lost a battle?" Kennedy turned, still smiling. "I came to see how the new dynamic is working out, and to meet the woman who managed to make you smile, which, by the way, is harder than climbing Everest." I smile. "You slightly contort your lips upwards while internally judging people. That doesn't count." Brianna bit her lip, trying not to laugh. Because that was true. Completely, hilariously true. James crossed his arms, his posture rigid. "You have 3 seconds to leave or I call security." "You won't call security. I'm your brother." 2 seconds. Kennedy laughed, took a step toward Brianna, and said, with all the nonchalance in the world, "You know, if he won't do anything, I will. Seriously. You're quite a spectacle." The sentence hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. James took 2 long strides, put himself between Kennedy and Brianna, and said, in a voice so cold it could freeze lava, "Touch her, and I fire you." Kennedy raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Ah, so you do care. Get out, now. I'm going, but only because I got what I came for." He nodded at Brianna. "It was a pleasure. See you around." And he left, leaving behind an awkward silence and a completely bewildered Brianna. James stood there, his back to her, shoulders tense, and breathing slightly uneven. "I apologize for that," he said, his voice low. "My brother has no filter. It's all right. He seems fun. He's annoying. That too." James turned around, and the expression on his face was a strange mix of frustration and something Brianna couldn't quite identify. Shame, perhaps, or discomfort. "He was flirting with you, I noticed. And did you like it?" The question came out quickly, almost involuntarily, and James seemed to regret it immediately. Brianna tilted her head, studying his face. "Are you asking me if I liked your brother flirting with me?" "No, forget it. It doesn't matter." "It sounds like it matters." "It doesn't matter. Mr. Sheridan, I have work." And he returned to his office, closing the door. Brianna stood there, processing, because that had been jealousy. There was no doubt. Subtle, contained, disguised as corporate concern, but jealousy, and she didn't know what to do with that information. Later, Justin showed up on the 18th floor with a flimsy excuse about needing to deliver something in person, but Brianna knew the truth. He just wanted to gossip. So, Justin said, sitting on the edge of her desk. I heard Kennedy showed up here. How do you already know that? Because I know everything. It's a gift and a curse, but mostly a gift. Brianna rolled her eyes. He came, he flirted, James got irritated, and now I'm confused. Confused about what? About whether James was irritated because Kennedy was being Kennedy, or if he was irritated because Kennedy was flirting with me. Justin smiled, that slow, knowing smile. Definitely the second option. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because you're the first person who makes him laugh. That means something. Or it means I'm unintentionally, pathetically funny. No, it means he likes you, like really likes you. The way that makes grown men get weird and territorial. Brianna covered her face with her hands. This is ridiculous. It's romantic. It's complicated. Justin stood up, patted her on the shoulder, and said before leaving, just don't stay in your own head too long. Sometimes the best things happen when you stop thinking and just feel. And he left, leaving Brianna alone with thoughts that spun faster than she could process. That evening, James worked late as usual. Brianna knew because the light in his office was still on when everyone else had already gone home. She hesitated. She should go home. She should let him work in peace. But instead, she went down to the cafeteria, bought a coffee, black, no sugar, exactly the way he liked it, and returned to the 18th floor. She knocked on the door. Come in. She opened it, found James hunched over papers, his hair slightly messy from running his hand through it. You're still here, he said, surprised. You are too. I always stay late. I know, that's why I brought this. She placed the coffee on his desk. James looked at the cup, then at her, and something in his face softened in a way that made her heart pound. Thank you. You're welcome. She should have left. She should have wished him good night and gone. But instead she stayed there, standing watching as he took a sip of the coffee. You got it right this time, he said with a tiny smile touching his lips. I learned from my mistakes. Good life philosophy. I'm full of them. They stood there in silence until James said, his voice lower. About earlier with Kennedy, I shouldn't have. It's fine. It's not. I acted like an idiot. You acted like someone who cares. The words slipped out before she could censor them, and the air between them shifted. It grew denser, more charged. James looked at her, truly looked, and Brianna felt her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with desire. I care, he said, his voice husky, more than I should. And before either of them could do anything about it, his phone rang. The moment shattered. James answered, switched back to professional mode, and Brianna took the opportunity to leave. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the ground floor button, and stood there, alone, breathing as if she had run a marathon. The doors began to close, and she whispered to herself, to the universe, to whoever was listening, this is dangerous, because it was. It was dangerous to like someone she shouldn't like. It was dangerous to feel things she shouldn't feel. It was dangerous to be so close to something that felt simultaneously right and completely wrong. But as the elevator descended, taking her back to the real world, Brianna couldn't help the smile that formed on her lips. Because maybe, dangerous was exactly what she needed. 6 weeks had passed since Brianna had accidentally become part of James Sheridan's life, and the world seemed to have found a strange, almost comfortable rhythm. She had learned to anticipate his needs before he asked. He had learned to trust her with things he would never trust anyone else with. And somewhere in the middle of it all, something had changed. Something dangerous. Something inevitable. That Monday in February, Brianna arrived at the office to find a message from HR asking her to attend an urgent meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. No details. Just urgent and attend. Grace was at her apartment the night before when the message arrived, and had looked at Brianna with that expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. They found out, Grace had said, eating popcorn. It took time, but they found out. Found out what? That you shouldn't be there. That everything was a mistake. That the system made a monumental blunder, and now they're going to fix it. Brianna had tried to sleep but couldn't. Because Grace was right, it had to be. 6 weeks was too long for a mistake to go unnoticed. Eventually, someone would check the records, ask the right questions, connect the wrong dots, and everything would end. The meeting was quick. painfully quick. The same woman in the black suit who had messed everything up was sitting on the other side of the table, with an expression that wavered between embarrassment and corporate efficiency. "So, Brianna," she began, flipping through papers with excessive formality, "we discovered an inconsistency in the records. It appears there was an administrative error a few weeks ago. You were transferred to a position that, well, technically you were never approved to fill." Brianna felt her stomach drop. "I know. You know?" "Yes. Since the, first day." The woman blinked, clearly not expecting that. "And you didn't say anything?" "I tried, but the system had already transferred me, and the CEO said I could stay temporarily, so I stayed." "I see." The woman gathered the papers, stacked them with irritating precision, and sighed. "Well, we'll need to correct this. Immediately. As of tomorrow, you will return to your original department. We will send someone qualified to replace you." Brianna nodded, because there was nothing else to do. "Understood. Great. I will inform the CEO this afternoon." And just like that, with the same bureaucratic speed with which everything had begun, everything was about to end. Brianna returned to the 18th floor on legs that felt like lead. James was in an external meeting, so she had a few hours before she needed to face him, a few hours to process, a few hours to pretend everything was fine. She sat down at her desk, looked at the colorful post-its she had stuck everywhere, at the coffee mug James had given her the week before. "To prevent further accidents," he had said with that half-smile, and felt something strange happen in her chest. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger, it was something worse, it was loss. Because in 6 weeks that place had become more than a job. It had become where she wanted to be, and James had become more than a boss. He had become someone she thought about when she woke up, someone she looked for amidst the chaos, someone who made her heart race just by existing in the same space. And now it was all going to end. The phone rang. She answered automatically. "CEO's office." "Brianna." Justin's voice came from the other side, too cheerful for the situation. "I heard HR. Called you in? What happened?" She took a deep breath. "They found out I'm going back to creative tomorrow." There was a pause, and then Justin said with a rare seriousness, "Damn. Yeah, damn. And does Mr. Sheridan know?" "Not yet. They'll inform him this afternoon." "How are you doing?" Brianna looked around the empty office at the space she had occupied for 6 weeks and told the truth. "Terrible. Do you want me to come over?" "No, I just need to process." "Okay, but if you change your mind, call me. We'll get ice cream and complain about cosmic injustice." She laughed, despite everything. "Thanks, Justin. Always." She hung up, and she stood there alone trying to decide whether she should wait for James to return, or if she should simply leave and avoid the uncomfortable goodbye that would inevitably come. But before she could decide, the elevator door opened and James walked in, with the expression of someone who had just received bad news. He stopped when he saw her, and something in his face changed. It became more tense, more guarded. "You already know," Brianna said, because there was no point in pretending. "I just received an email from HR." He walked to her desk, stopped a few feet away, and crossed his arms. "They are reassigning you tomorrow." "I know. And you're fine with that?" The question came out harsher than he probably intended, and Brianna found herself studying his face for clues about what he was truly feeling. But James was good at hiding things. Too good. "I don't know if fine is the right word," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But it makes sense. I never should have been here in the first place. You should have." The words came out quickly, almost violently, and James seemed surprised by himself. Brianna blinked. "What?" He ran a hand through his hair, turned, and walked toward the window, as if looking at the city below could organize his thoughts. "Nothing. Forget it. James, you go back to creative tomorrow, that's it. End of story." And he walked into his office, closing the door before she could reply. Brianna stood there, heart pounding unevenly and a growing confusion in her chest. Because that hadn't been acceptance. It had been something else entirely. That night, James was at his brother's apartment. Without remembering exactly how he had gotten there, Kennedy had called, said something about beer and pizza, and James had accepted because being alone seemed worse. They were sitting on the absurdly expensive couch Kennedy had bought at a ridiculous auction, with open beers and a half-eaten pizza forgotten on the coffee table. "So," Kennedy said, taking a long sip, "she's leaving tomorrow." James didn't answer. He just looked at the bottle in his own hands as if it held the answers to the universe. "You could stop this, you know." "I can't. It's an HR matter. Protocol. Processes." "Processes?" Kennedy laughed without humor. "You're the CEO, James. You literally make the rules. It doesn't work that way. It works exactly that way. You just don't want to admit it." James finally looked at his brother. "Admit what? That you like her. Like, really like her. The way that scares you. The way that makes you question everything you've built." There was a long, heavy pause, and then James said, in a low voice, "What if I do like her? What does it change?" "Everything. It changes everything." Kennedy leaned forward, his expression more serious than James had seen in years. "Look, I know you like control. I know you've built a whole life on certainty, but sometimes the best things happen when you let go of control and just jump. Jump. Yeah, jump, with no safety net, no plan B, no guarantees." James shook his head, finished his beer, and placed the bottle on the table. "What if I jump and she doesn't want me? What if you don't jump and spend the rest of your life wondering, what if?" The question echoed in the silence, too heavy to be ignored. Kennedy stood up, patted his brother on the shoulder, and said before leaving the room, "If you want her to stay, maybe you need to tell her that. Not HR, not me, her." And James was left with the question spinning in his mind and an inconvenient truth growing in his chest. He didn't want her to leave. He didn't want another assistant. He didn't want the silence back. He didn't want the predictable routine he had before she showed up and messed everything up. He wanted the chaos. He wanted the bad jokes. He wanted the colorful post-its and the coffees delivered with shy smiles and the glances that lasted too long. He wanted her. And maybe it was time to admit it, out loud, to the right person. The next morning, Brianna arrived on the 18th floor for the last time. She had a small box in her hands, her coffee mug, some personal papers, a photo Justin had taken of the two of them laughing at something silly. Grace had tried to talk her out of going. "Leave your stuff there and have someone pick it up later," she had said, with that practical wisdom. But Brianna knew she had to do this. She needed closure. She needed to see James one last time and pretend everything was fine, even though it wasn't. When she entered, the office was empty. No receptionist, no James, just silence and the morning light streaming through the windows. She placed the box on her desk, looked around one last time, and was about to leave when she heard his voice. "Were you going to leave without saying goodbye?" Brianna turned around. James was standing at the office entrance with an expression she had never seen before. Exposed, raw, frighteningly honest. "I thought it would be easier that way." "Easier for whom?" "For everyone." James walked toward her, slowly, as if every step cost him something. "Do you think I want you to leave? I think you want to go back to the normal routine. No disasters, no spilled coffees, no confusion. Do you really think that?" "I don't know what to think." Her voice came out louder than she intended, loaded with frustration and something close to pain. "You are impossible to read, James. You smile, but you don't say anything. You look, but you don't act. You leave me here, not knowing if it's because you trust me or if it's just because you don't want to deal with the bureaucracy of letting me go. I left you here because I couldn't imagine you anywhere else." The words came out fast, urgent, and hung in the air like an unplanned confession. Brianna blinked. "What?" James closed the distance between them, stopping so close that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the smell of coffee and something woody that had already become too familiar. "I don't want another assistant. I don't want the silence back. I don't want to wake up and not have you around asking too many questions and messing up my routine and making me laugh at things I shouldn't find funny." "James, I know this doesn't make sense. I know you are chaos and I am control. I know 6 weeks shouldn't be enough to change everything, but they did. You changed everything, and I don't want you to go." Brianna felt the air leave her lungs. "Are you saying this because I like you?" he said slowly, each word heavy with meaning. "I like the way you talk too fast. I like the way you turn everything into a joke when you get nervous. I like the way you look at me as if I'm more than just the CEO of this company. You are more. I know. Because you made me realize it. They stood there, close, so close that Brianna could see the nuances in his light eyes, the way his jaw tensed when he tried to find the right words. Now what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Now you decide. If you want to stay. If you want to try. If you want to risk it. Risk what? This. And he raised his hand, lightly brushing his fingers against the side of her face, a gentle touch but heavy with intent. Us. And then, because words were no longer enough, because 6 weeks of tension and glances and almost moments had reached their limit, James did something he had never done before. He closed the distance, and he kissed her. It was like electricity, like something inevitable finally happening. Brianna responded immediately, raising her hands to cup his face, pulling him closer, the kiss deepening with an intensity that made the entire world disappear. James felt everything. He felt his heart race in a way that defied logic. He felt the control he had maintained for years completely crumble. He felt her body pressed against his, soft, warm, real. His hands, always so controlled, always so measured, trembled slightly as they slid to the back of her neck, holding her as if she were something precious, fragile. And Brianna felt the world tilt. She felt the heat radiating from him, the woody scent mixed with coffee that had already become too familiar. She felt his hands firm, yet gentle, and she thought, completely irrationally, that she could spend the rest of her life doing this. When they finally separated, both were breathless, processing what had just happened. James held her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing smooth lines on her cheeks, and said, with crooked smile that made her chest flip, "So, does this mean you're staying?" Brianna laughed, the sound coming out half trembling, half relieved. "It depends. Are you going to stop being an enigma? Probably not. Then I guess I'll have to stay just to annoy you until you learn." "Great plan. I know, I'm full of them." And he kissed her again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if he were memorizing every detail, every sensation. Because James Sheridan, CEO, strategic genius, a man who controlled millions with intelligence and logic, had finally found something he couldn't control. And for the first time in his life, he was completely fine with it. The meeting with HR happened the following afternoon, and James walked into the room with a confidence that made it seem like he was about to close a billion-dollar deal, not resolve an administrative error that had turned into an unexpected relationship. The same woman in the black suit was sitting on the other side of the table, accompanied by a middle-aged man who was probably her supervisor. Both had the expression of people about to have an uncomfortable conversation. "Mr. Sheridan," the woman began, nervously adjusting her glasses, "thank you for taking our call. We wanted to discuss Ms. Royster's situation." "Of course." James sat down, crossed his legs with casual elegance, and waited. "As you know, there was an error. She was incorrectly transferred to your team, and we need to correct that immediately." "I understand. We have already found a qualified replacement, someone with proven executive assistant experience. She can start next week." James tilted his head, his expression perfectly neutral. "That won't be necessary." The two HR employees exchanged confused glances. "Excuse me?" the man said, leaning forward. "You don't want a replacement?" "I don't want anyone replacing Brianna. But Mr. Sheridan, she doesn't have the qualifications. She has exactly the qualifications I need." James leaned back in his chair, and a small smile, almost imperceptible but definitely present, touched his lips. "She is intelligent, creative, learns quickly, and has a rare ability to turn chaos into functional solutions." The woman blinked, as if trying to process whether that was a compliment or a disguised criticism. But technically, she was placed in the position by mistake. And technically, I am the CEO of this company, and I get to decide who works for me. James's voice held no hostility, just a firmness that left no room for debate. "I want her to stay, officially, with an appropriate contract, adjusted salary, and all the formalities you need to sleep soundly at night." The man cleared his throat. "Mr. Sheridan, with all due respect, we need to understand the reason for this decision. Is there a specific reason why you want to keep her?" James smiled. a complete, devastating smile that made the employees visibly uncomfortable. "Yes, she makes me laugh." The woman looked at the man. The man looked at the woman. Both seemed to be trying to decide if this was a joke or a serious admission. "She makes you laugh?" the woman repeated, as if testing the words in her mouth. "Yes, and she makes me work better. And she makes me want to be here every day instead of just fulfilling obligations." James stood up, adjusted his suit, and walked toward the door. He paused, turned, and added, "So, if it's not too much trouble, I would like you to process her transfer permanently to a position created specifically for her, something that combines her creative skills with the company's strategic needs." And he left, leaving behind 2 utterly confused HR employees and a story that would likely become corporate legend in the coming months. Meanwhile, Brianna was at Grace's apartment, sitting on the couch, eating ice cream straight from the tub and trying not to panic. "So," Grace said, stealing a spoonful of her ice cream, "you kissed the boss. Technically, he's not my boss anymore, because technically I don't work for him anymore." "You are avoiding the question." "I know I'm avoiding the question." Grace laughed, picked up the remote, and turned off the TV to give her full attention to her friend. "Okay, let's process this like adults. Do you like him?" "Yes." "Like really like him?" "Yes." "And does he like you?" Brianna paused, the spoon suspended in the air. "He said he does." "So what is the problem?" "The problem is I don't know how this works. He's the CEO. I'm me. We work at the same company. People will talk. It's going to be weird. What if it goes wrong? What if—" Grace grabbed her friend's shoulders and shook her lightly. "Stop, breathe, and listen to me." Brianna obeyed, taking a deep breath. "You spent 6 weeks working beside him. You hit it off. You understand each other. He makes you happy. You make him laugh. That's not a small thing, Bri. That's rare. So stop creating problems that don't even exist yet and just live. Live. Yeah, live. Date the guy. Let him take you to dinner. Kiss him whenever you feel like it. And stop sabotaging yourself before you even start." Brianna looked at her friend, felt something in her chest settle, and smiled. "You're good at this." "I know. It's a gift." Grace returned the smile and stole another spoonful of ice cream. "Now tell me, how was the kiss?" "Grace." "What?" "I need details. This is part of the best friend code." And Brianna told her everything, every detail. And as she spoke, she realized she wasn't scared anymore. She was just happy. The next morning, Brianna received a formal email from HR informing her that her position had been made official, not as an executive assistant, but as a creative connection strategist, a role that had apparently been invented specifically for her and involved working directly with James on projects that combined creativity and strategy. The salary was absurdly better than what she was earning before. The responsibilities were perfectly suited to her skills. And the office was still on the 18th floor. Justin showed up at her apartment before she even finished reading the email, knocking on the door with the urgency of someone who had vital information to share. "Did you see it?" he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "The email? Yes, I just saw it. He created a job for you out of thin air. That's like a corporate declaration of love." Brianna laughed, still staring at her phone screen as if the words might disappear if she blinked. "He just wants me to stay. He wants you. Period." Justin flopped onto the couch, grabbed a cushion, and hugged it. "So now what? What are you two going to do? Try dating, I guess? Discreetly? Probably not. Good, because discretion has never been your strong suit." And he was absolutely right, because the following week, when Brianna returned to the 18th floor officially, James tried to maintain a professional distance. He tried to act as if nothing had changed. He tried to pretend he wasn't constantly aware of where she was, what she was doing, how her laugh sounded when Justin sent bad jokes via text. But he failed, miserably. On Tuesday, he walked past her desk and left a coffee, exactly the way she liked it, without saying a word. He just placed it there, gave her a half smile, and returned to his office. On Wednesday, she went into his office to deliver reports and found a post-it stuck to his laptop monitor in her handwriting. "You are working too much. Breathe." He had kept the post-it in his drawer, as if it were something precious. On Friday, There was a moment when Brianna tripped over her own feet while exiting the elevator, because of course she did, and James caught her by the arm, steadying her. And for 3 entire seconds they stood there too close, looking at each other in a way that made the receptionist pretend she was very busy with the computer. "You have a knack for tripping over flat surfaces," James said, his voice low, amused. "It's a gift. I perceive that. Are you going to let go of me, or do you plan to hold me all day?" "I'm considering my options." Brianna raised an eyebrow. "James Sheridan, indecisive. That's new. You have that effect on me." And then, because they were terrible at discretion, he leaned in and kissed her forehead. Quick, soft, but enough to make her heart pound and the receptionist pretend something very interesting was happening with the printer. By the end of the second week, the entire company knew, not because someone had told them, but because James and Brianna were completely incapable of hiding what they felt. The glances lasted too long. The conversations had an obvious subtext, and every time James smiled, truly smiled, it was always directed at her. Kennedy showed up at his brother's office one Saturday afternoon, finding James working alone as usual. Except there was a woman's jacket hanging on the chair next to the desk, and a mug with lipstick in the office that James always kept impeccable. "So," Kennedy said, throwing himself onto the leather armchair, "you finally admitted it." James didn't even look up. From his papers. "Admitted what?" "That you're human, that you feel things, that you're capable of liking someone without trying to manage it, like a project." "I didn't turn anything into a project." "Liar." James finally looked up and smiled. A real, complete smile that Kennedy hadn't seen in years. "Okay, maybe I did a cost-benefit analysis of the emotional kind." "Of course you did, but I quit halfway through, because I realized some things can't be quantified." Kennedy leaned forward, genuinely surprised. "Wow, that was deep. Are you okay?" "I am. For the first time in a long time, I am." And there was something in the way he said it, sincere, unguarded, that made Kennedy smile back. "I'm proud of you, man. Because I admitted I like someone? Because you finally stopped being afraid to live?" James didn't answer. He just nodded, because there was truth in that. 2 months later, on an April evening when Chicago was surprisingly pleasant, James and Brianna were at his apartment, sitting on the couch, with a half-empty bottle of wine and a pizza they had ordered, and forgotten to eat because they were too busy talking. "You know, what's funny?" Brianna said, turning to face him, her legs tucked under her body. "What?" "This all started because I walked into the wrong room." James took her hand, interlaced their fingers, and smiled that way that still made her stomach flip. "Best mistake anyone ever made." "You think so?" "I'm sure of it." She tilted her head, studying his face, that face that had become so familiar, so necessary. "What if I hadn't walked in? What if I had noticed the mistake sooner? Then I would probably still be alone, working late, not knowing that something was missing. And now you know?" "Now I know." He pulled her closer, brushing his lips against her forehead. You were what was missing." Brianna felt something warm spread through her chest, something without a name but that felt like raw, unfiltered happiness. That was surprisingly romantic, for someone who lives by control. "I have my moments. Rare, but appreciated." He laughed, the sound low, intimate, and kissed her. Slow, completely, as if they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Because sometimes the best plans begin with the biggest mistake. And sometimes chaos puts you in the place you were really supposed to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, tripping into the wrong room leads you directly to the right person. And James Sheridan, the man of control, logic, and precision, had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Some things are worth it precisely because they cannot be planned. They simply happen. And when they happen with the right person, all you have to do is hold on tight and enjoy the chaos. Because chaos, it turned out, could be absolutely perfect. The following weekend, James did something that surprised even himself. He called Brianna on a Saturday morning and said without preamble, "Let's go out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Out? Like, out of the apartment?" "Yes, out of the apartment. Into the outside world, where normal people do normal things." "You know how to do normal things." "I'll learn. With you." And just like that, an hour later, they were walking along the pier with coffees in hand, and the April sun illuminating the lake in a way that made the city seem less gray, less corporate, less serious. Brianna wore jeans and a light blouse, her hair loose over her shoulders. Casual, free, completely different from the woman who navigated the 18th floor in heels and barely disguised anxiety. "You're staring at me again," she said, without looking away from the lake. "I am. Why?" "Because you look different." "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying the weight of not disappointing anyone." Brianna turned to him, surprised by the observation. "You notice these things?" "I always notice. I just usually don't say anything." "Maybe you should say more." "Maybe." He took her hand, interlaced their fingers, and gently pulled her toward the Ferris wheel. "Let's go. You want to ride the Ferris wheel?" "I want to experience something that doesn't involve control. That's personal growth. I'm proud." They stepped into the cabin, sat side by side, and as the Ashiua wheel began to turn, James noticed something strange. He wasn't thinking about work. He wasn't mentally reviewing emails or reorganizing priorities. He was just there, present, with her. "You know what I think?" Brianna said, looking out the window as they ascended. "What?" "That you needed this a long time ago. You just didn't know it." "Needed what?" "Ferris wheels? To allow yourself to be human." James looked at her profile illuminated by the sun, and felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't discomfort. It was the opposite. It was recognition, as if she could see parts of him that he himself had forgotten existed. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me." She turned, smiled that way that made the world seem less complicated, and rested her head on his shoulder. "You're welcome." 2 weeks later, Brianna convinced him to go swimming. Kennedy had a house outside the city with a pool, and he offered the space for the weekend. James hesitated, but Brianna insisted with that impossible-to-deny enthusiasm. "You know how to swim, right?" she asked as they drove. "I can swim." "But do you swim, like, for fun?" "No." "Then today you will." And he swam. Not much, but enough for Brianna to laugh when she saw him emerge from the water with dripping hair and the expression of someone who was reevaluating life choices. "You look like a wet magazine model," she said, floating on her back with irritating tranquility. "You look very comfortable for someone who almost drowned trying to dive." "I didn't almost drown. I just swallowed water." Strategically, James swam over to her, held her waist gently, and pulled her close. The water was warm, the sun beginning to set on the horizon, and everything felt suspended in that moment, as if the rest of the world had paused just for them. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Hi. You're relaxed. This is new. I'm learning." "From whom?" "From you." Brianna wrapped her arms around his neck, their bodies floating together, and James felt something change. Something deep. Something that went beyond attraction or chemistry or any rational term he tried to use to describe what he felt. It was surrender. Complete. Terrifying. Inevitable. "I love you," he said, the words coming out before he could censor them. Brianna blinked, surprised. "What?" "I love you, and I know it's fast, and I know it doesn't make sense, but it's true." She stayed there, floating in the water, looking at him as if seeing something for the first time. And then she smiled. Not the polite smile, not the nervous smile, but that complete, devastating smile that made his heart pound. "I love you too. Seriously. Seriously. And I also think it's fast. And I also think it doesn't make sense. But here we are." James pulled her in and kissed her. Right there, in the pool, with the sun setting and the whole world disappearing around them. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care about logic or planning or control. He only cared about her. That night, they lay on the grass beside the pool, looking at the stars that began to appear in the dark sky. "Do you think it would have, happened?" Brianna asked, her head resting on his chest. "If I hadn't walked into that room? I don't know. Maybe. In another way. But do you think we would have found each other?" James thought, tracing lazy circles on her arm with his fingers. "I think so. Somehow. Because some things are inevitable." "Do you really believe that?" "Now I do." She leaned up, kissed his jaw, and whispered, "Me too." And there, under the stars, Away from the office and responsibilities and everything that defined them professionally, they were just James and Brianna, two people who had stumbled into each other by accident and decided, against all logic, to stay. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with warnings or clear signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as a mistake, as confusion, as complete chaos. And sometimes chaos is exactly what you needed to finally find the right place. Life has a curious way of turning moments into years without you noticing. James's bachelor apartment downtown gave way to a house in Lincoln Park, considerably larger, a necessity more than a choice, as he liked to say. It had enough space for the organized chaos that their life had become. Toys strategically scattered around the living room, drawings stuck to the fridge with character magnets he didn't recognize, and a growing collection of children's books competing for space with the business volumes on the shelves. It was a Saturday morning in June, and James was in the kitchen attempting to make pancakes while Brian, 6, sat on the counter, watching with the seriousness of a quality inspector. "That one's crooked." Brian pointed to the pancake James had just flipped. "Pancakes don't have to be perfect. You always say things have to be perfect." "I changed my mind." "Because of Mom?" James looked at his son. Light eyes like his, dark hair like his, but with that mischievous expression that was pure Brianna, and smiled. "Yes, because of Mom. She says you were boring before. She's right. You're still boring. Sometimes. Thank you for the honesty." Brian swung his legs, tapping his heels against the cabinet. "Can I add chocolate?" "Your mother will kill me. But can I?" James sighed, grabbed the chocolate chips from the cabinet, and handed them to his son. "Just don't tell her." "I always tell her." "I know." Brianna appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing one of his sweatshirts that had become hers over the years, her 7-month pregnancy belly prominent under the fabric. Jasmine, 4, was clinging to her leg like a human koala, her blonde hair messy and her eyes still sleepy. "Chocolate in the pancakes?" Brianna raised an eyebrow. "Did Brian rat me out?" "No, but I know you two." James walked over to her, placed a kiss on her forehead, and then bent down to kiss her belly. "Good morning, Victoria." "She can't hear you," Jasmine said with the ruthless logic of a 4-year-old. "Yes, she can. She just doesn't answer yet." "Why?" "Because she's busy growing." "Growing what?" "Fingers, hair, an opinion about her dad." Brianna laughed, ran her hand through Jasmine's hair, and sat in the chair James pulled out for her. "How did you sleep?" "Well, until Victoria decided 3 in the morning was gymnastics time. She inherited your energy. Poor thing." James returned to the stove, flipped another pancake, this one less crooked, and served the plates. Brian attacked breakfast with destructive enthusiasm. Jasmine ate meticulously, separating each piece into equal portions, and Brianna watched everything with that soft smile that always appeared when she was with her family. "What are we going to do today?" Brian asked, his mouth full of pancake. "Chew first," Brianna said automatically. He chewed, swallowed, and repeated, "What are we going to do?" "I thought we'd go to the park," James suggested. "If your mother isn't too tired." "I'm not tired." "You were making that face." "What face?" "The I'm pregnant and pretending I'm not exhausted face." "I don't have that face." "Yes, you do," Brian and Jasmine said in unison. Brianna looked at the 3 of them, shook her head, and laughed. "All right, you win. The park is great." An hour later, they were at the Lincoln Park Zoo, with Brian running ahead trying to see everything at once, Jasmine holding Brianna's hand tightly, and James pushing the empty stroller they had brought just in case. "Do you remember the last time we came here?" Brianna asked, watching Brian stop in front of the lion enclosure. "I remember." Brian asked if the lions ate pizza, and Jasmine was convinced the penguins were. Wearing suits. She wasn't wrong. They really do look dressed up. Brianna laughed, rested her head on his shoulder as they walked. "Do you think it will be very different? With 3? It will be more chaotic. You used to hate chaos. I still hate it. But I've learned to live with." So he put his arm around her, careful of her belly. "Besides, chaos with you is different." "Different how?" "Different like worth it." She smiled, turned her face, and kissed him quickly. "You've become romantic with age. I've become realistic. There's a difference." "Not much." Brian ran back, his face red with excitement. "There are baby monkeys. Can we see them?" "Let's go," James said, and let his son pull him by the hand toward the primates. Jasmine stayed next to Brianna, looking at her mother's belly with that serious curiosity that was her trademark. "Will Victoria play with me?" "She will, but it will take a little while. She needs to grow first." "How long?" "A few months. She's due in August, remember?" "Is August far away?" 2 months. "That's very far." Brianna bent down, with difficulty, and reached her daughter's height. "But, while we wait, you can help me prepare her room. Choose colors. Decorate. What do you think?" Jasmine thought, with that exaggerated seriousness. "Can it be purple?" "It can be purple. And with stars. Stars too." "Okay." And she ran off to catch up with her father and brother, leaving. Brianna smiling and getting up with the help of the railing. Later, after the zoo, after lunch, after Brian and Jasmine finally collapsed onto the couch exhausted watching cartoons, James and Brianna retreated to the bedroom. She was lying in bed, her feet propped up on pillows. A courtesy from James, who insisted that circulation was important, and he was sitting beside her, gently massaging her swollen ankles with a tenderness that always surprised her. "You don't have to do this," she said, but made no move to stop him. "I know, but I want to. You're good at this. Practice. You've been pregnant twice before, remember?" "How could I forget? You created a timetable for the contractions both times. And it worked. It worked because I went into labor exactly when your timetable predicted, which was luck, not science." "I disagree." "Of course you disagree." They settled into a comfortable silence, the sound of cartoons filtering in from the hallway, and Brianna looked at the ceiling with that thoughtful expression James had learned to recognize. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How everything changed." "Like, absolutely. Everything. Regretful?" "You always ask that. And you always answer. So you already know the answer." She turned her head, looking at him with that smile that still made his heart race. "No, I've never regretted it. Not for a second. Even with all the chaos? Especially because of the chaos." She placed her hand on her belly, feeling Victoria move. "Do you remember when you thought control was the only way to live?" "I remember. And I was wrong. Completely wrong. Thank you for showing me that. I didn't show you anything. You learned on your own. I just caused enough disasters for you to realize." James laughed, leaned in, and kissed her belly again. "Thank you for the disasters, then." "You're welcome. I have more planned." "I don't doubt it." That night, after putting Brian and Jasmine to bed, a process that involved 3 stories, 2 cups of water, and a negotiation about how many nightlights were really necessary, James and Brianna stood in the doorway of what would soon be Victoria's room. The walls were painted light purple, as Jasmine had requested. There were glowing stars stuck to the ceiling. The crib was already assembled, waiting. "Do you think we're ready?" Brianna asked, leaning on him. "For a 3rd child? Probably not." That wasn't comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be honest. She laughed, turned in his arms, and hugged him the way she could with her belly in the... "Duma, you know what's funny?" "What?" "That this all started because I walked into the wrong room. And now here we are, with 2 children, expecting a 3rd, living a life neither of us planned. Did you ever plan anything in life?" "No, but you planned everything. And your non-plans worked out better than anything I planned. I think we work well together." "I think so." James held her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing smooth lines on her cheeks, and said with that raw sincerity he reserved only for her, "I love you. You know that, right?" "I know. And I love you too. Even when you try to create timetables for things that can't be timed." "I'll stop doing that." "No, you won't. Probably not." She smiled, pulled him in for a slow, deep kiss, the kind that said everything without needing words. And there, in the purple room with stars on the ceiling, awaiting the arrival of another daughter surrounded by the adorable chaos of a life they never planned but built together, James and Brianna realized the most important truth of all. Sometimes walking into the wrong room is exactly what you need to find the right place. And sometimes the biggest mistake leads you directly to the most perfect love. And as Victoria moved in her belly, and Brian snored softly in the next room, and Jasmine murmured something about stars in her sleep, James Sheridan man of control, logic, and spreadsheets, finally understood what Brianna had been trying to teach him all along. Life doesn't have to be perfect to be absolutely wonderful. It just needs to be lived, with the right person, and he had found his in the wrong room, on the wrong day, at the perfectly wrong moment that turned into everything right. 18 months passed. The venue was decorated with an elegance that managed to be sophisticated without losing its charm. Soft lights hung on almost invisible wires, white and dark green flowers arranged with intentional simplicity, light wooden chairs lined up in rows leading to a makeshift altar overlooking Lake Michigan. It was autumn, the kind of Chicago autumn where the air was crisp but not biting, where the leaves fell in shades of gold and red, and where everything seemed to carry a cinematic nostalgia. Brianna was in one of the rooms on the second floor of the venue, looking at her reflection in the mirror, with a mix of disbelief and raw joy. The dress was simple, no exaggeration, no unnecessary volume, just fluid fabric that fell perfectly, a modest neckline, and a back that made Grace sigh every time she looked. "You look beautiful," Grace said, adjusting the veil for the third time even though it was already perfect. "Like absurdly beautiful, unfairly beautiful." Brianna smiled, still looking at the reflection as if the woman there wasn't entirely her. "I'm about to get married. You are. To the man you met because you walked into the wrong room. Don't remind me of that now." "Why, it's the best part of the story." Grace laughed, picked up the bouquet of white flowers, and handed it to her friend. "By the way, have you seen Justin? He's downstairs telling the guests something about how he knew all along." "Of course he is. And Kennedy is tipsy. Already?" "Slightly, enough to make the speech interesting." Brianna laughed, feeling her nervousness turn into something lighter. "This is going to be a disaster. It's going to be perfect." And it was. The ceremony was short, as they both wanted. No excessive pomp, no long speeches, just sincere words, glances that said more than any vow could express, and a kiss that drew applause and a few whistles. Courtesy of Kennedy, obviously. James wore a dark gray suit that made his light eyes look even more intense. And when Brianna walked down the aisle toward him, holding her father's arm, he smiled that way, the way she had learned to recognize as, "I'm completely in love and I don't care who knows." "Hi," she said when she reached the altar, because she couldn't think of anything more eloquent. "Hi," he replied, taking her hand and interlacing their fingers as he always did. And there, surrounded by friends, family, and the absurd chance that had made it all happen, they promised things, big things, small things, things that involved love, patience, and accepting that one of them would still trip over flat surfaces occasionally. The reception was exactly the kind of celebration that suited them, elegant but relaxed, with good food, live music, and a dance floor that Grace monopolized for an entire hour. Kennedy gave the best man speech with his champagne glass already, half empty, and a confidence only alcohol and genetics could provide. "When my brother told me he had hired the wrong assistant," Kennedy began, smiling broadly, "I thought it was just another boring corporate story. But then I met Brianna, and I realized James hadn't hired the wrong person. He had finally found the right person." He raised his glass. "To the woman who made my robot brother discover he had a heart, and to my brother, who finally admitted that spreadsheets don't solve everything. They solve most things," James mumbled, making Brianna laugh. "But they don't solve love," Kennedy finished. "So cheers to the newlyweds, and to the wrong room that changed everything." Justin, sitting at the next table, shouted, "I knew it from the beginning," and Grace threw a napkin at him. The night progressed with that fluidity that only happens when the right people are in the right places. There was dancing, laughter, embarrassing stories told by relatives who shouldn't have access to microphones, and a moment when James and Brianna managed to escape to the outdoor balcony, away from the noise, alone under the lights and the darkening sky. "How are you doing?" he asked, putting his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "Married. Officially married. To you. Technically, we've been married for 20 minutes. I know. And I managed not to trip walking down the aisle, which, let's face it, is the real miracle of the day," James laughed, That low sound she loved and kissed the top of her head. Regretful? Of the wedding? No. Of walking into that wrong room? Definitely not. Even though it caused all that chaos? Especially for causing all that chaos. She tilted her head back, looking at his face illuminated by the soft light coming from inside. Do you still think it was the best mistake anyone ever made? I'm absolutely certain of it. They stood there, swaying gently to the muffled sound of music coming from the ballroom, and Brianna thought about how it all began. A mistake, a misunderstanding, a series of coincidences that shouldn't have worked but worked perfectly. You know what I think? She said, her voice low, intimate. What? That sometimes the universe knows exactly what it's doing, even when it looks like everything is going wrong. James smiled, held her face in his hands, and said before kissing her, or sometimes we just get lucky enough to walk into the wrong room at the right time. And maybe that was it. Luck, destiny, chaos disguised as coincidence. Or maybe it was just what happens when two completely opposite people stop fighting the improbable and simply let it happen. Because James Sheridan had learned that not everything needs a plan, and Brianna Royster had learned that sometimes stumbling on the path leads you exactly where you were meant to be. And together they had discovered the simplest and most complicated truth of all. Sometimes the best plans begin with the biggest mistake, and sometimes the most improbable love is exactly what transforms everything. Inside the ballroom, Kennedy raised his glass once more, because one speech was never enough, and shouted loud enough for the couple on the balcony to hear, "Cheers to the most perfect mistake Chicago has ever seen." And Grace, Justin, and everyone else present raised their glasses, laughing, celebrating, witnessing, because some stories don't need to make sense to be perfect, they just need to be true. And this one was completely, absurdly, wonderfully true. So have you ever met someone who messed everything up, and yet put everything back in place? This story shows that even the biggest mistakes can turn into destiny. Comment, leave your like, subscribe, and hype this story so it can reach even more people. See you in the next story.